Hey, everybody, welcome back to Turn Bark Time. I'm the Turn,
I'm the Bark.
and we're going to be here a long time. Welcome back, everybody, to Season 3, Episode 9. 9? Ooh, nice. Good technique. Good finger technique.
Weird.
Yep. It's an amalgamation.
Amalgamation zombie.
Yep. So hey everybody, I hope you're doing well. Hope we're sounding well. Barker and I both have microphones. We're upgrading our podcast equipment because we're up to the tens of viewers and it's pretty exciting for us. Bark, how you been?
I've been doing great. We're in that, run up to spring break. So just trying to maintain sanity for a little bit longer, and then we can cut loose for a week and then make the final push to the end of the year, graduation and AP exams, all that great stuff.
Exciting. Yeah, we're doing well. We're looking. I'm staring at conferences next week, and kids are getting themselves all set up. And end of the quarters on Friday, so it'll be a real good time to kind of get that. And then next week will be a good reset, going into that final fourth quarter, and get to start track when we come back from spring break, which will be super exciting. So I'm ready for the break, but I'm also ready to start track. So, ladies and gentlemen, kind of a fun topic brought to you by John Anderson. If you want to travel on Southwest 1 with West Coast Connection, make sure you invite John Anderson. John, this is a big shout out to you, Johnny boy. We are going to record a episode on Japanese invasion of the Aleutian Islands. And for those of you who don't know, the Aleutian Islands are, when you look at that giant map of Alaska, and you see that little tail of islands that go off there. Yep, nice little thumb work right there. That is going to be Japan's one invasion of the United States, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that one of those age-old myths that we like to say, like, or not a myth, I guess, like when history we go, oh, well, America's never lost a war, or America's never been invaded since the War of 1812. We often glance over the Japanese occupation, 14-month occupation of 3 Aleutian Islands.
Yep.
Because at that point, Alaska wasn't a state, it was a territory.
Correct.
So I think that's the technicality that people will try and go, oh, it wasn't a state, it was just a territory. That they'll try and, kind of like, I guess, downplay the importance of it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it should go to say, like, first things first, it was not meant as like, it wasn't the tip of the spear of a invasion of the United States. It was not intended to be the invasion of the United States. It was to control the North Pacific.
And so one of the big things is they actually the area they attacked. If I'm going to say, are we going to call it Kiska, right? Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's the yep.
Yeah. So they basically occupy this island. Their invasion happens on June 6, 1942. Ironic that June 6th of 1944 will be the major land invasion of Europe. So not 2 years later. And they actually, what's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say deoccupy, but that's not the right. They retreat off the island on the 28th of July, 1943. And so they occupy, I have Kiska and Attu Island, I think I'm saying correctly.
Yeah, it's Attu. The only reason I know that it's Attu is because of the movie Big Year with Steve Martin and Jack Black, where they're going birding. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they go to Attu on that. So that is the westernmost of the Aleutian Islands.
All right. I love it. And so, yeah, so basically, again, like Barker said, the goal was not to necessarily, the goal wasn't to occupy Alaska. The goal was to secure their northern flank, the North Pacific, so that they could continue working their way, island hopping down and taking over different territories in the South Pacific.
And there's a couple of different thoughts. Like, some people say that it was a diversion. They were hoping that they would drag more of the Pacific Fleet away from Midway, because this battle, the invasion of Attu and of Kiska, happens, and they bomb Dutch Harbor. So if you watch Deadliest Catch, June 3rd, 1942, you have carrier-based planes that come and bomb Pearl Harbor, which was a submarine depot at the time.
Dutch Harbor, not Pearl Harbor.
Oh, sorry, Dutch. Did I say Pearl Harbor?
You did, but that's
My bad.
also they did
Dutch
bomb.
Harbor.
They did bomb Pearl
Dutch.
Harbor too.
Yeah, he's the Germans bombed Pearl. Anyway, Animal House. But
I love that
they
movie.
bomb Dutch. They take that over at the same time that Midway happens, and so there's one of the schools of thought is that it was a diversionary tactic to try and pull more of the American Pacific Fleet away from Midway to soften up Midway. Another thought was that it potentially was priming them to maybe start an incursion into Siberia or Kamchatka. For those of you who play Risk and know
Yes.
where that is on a map,
Yep.
right by Irkutsk. So all you Risk players out there, good for you. But I mean, it's interesting because they start with Kiska and they land and they get there. The Japanese, they land with 550 men and they're ready to destroy every military installation they can find, and there's nothing.
Not nothing.
Well, almost nothing.
Okay.
And then they go. So it's interesting because like on the archipelago, right, which is a series of islands in a chain, um, they kind of hit in the middle and then work their way back out to the west. And they end up at Attu. And Attu only had about 50 people on it. There was there was a radio operator who was not a military radio operator. He was in his 60s.
Yep.
Charles, what was Charles's name? Charles. His last name's Jones, something Jones. Anyways, he was the radio operator, and his wife was a teacher out there for the Bureau of Indian Affairs because she was teaching the Aleut tribes that lived on Attu, right? The indigenous people who've been there for thousands of years. And the Japanese arrive. They come in, and her husband essentially was giving like weather reports. Like that was his job. He's out like, and if you don't know, like Attu is like remote, like no flushy toilets.
Yep.
Remote. And so anyways, like he gives a warning back to Dutch Harbor that essentially the Japanese are coming, breaks the radio. And I went through and I looked at, there's a lot of good stuff from the National Park Service. There's good resources from, I read some other stuff that was from the National World War II Museum out of New Orleans, which I think you've been to.
Oh my gosh. New Orleans has this mentality of partying and everything like that. Please spend a whole day at the World War II Museum. And the reason is because the Higgins boat, the P.T. Higgins boat, the designer is from New Orleans, and he argued to have the museum built in New Orleans, and it is incredible.
And so there was also, I looked at sources from the Alaska Veterans Organization. And so like there's, I guess it's not fully decided what exactly happened. The narrative is kind of up in the air. The husband doesn't survive the initial invasion for whatever reason. There's different stories of what went down and why he was killed. His wife will actually be taken as a prisoner and sent back to Yokohama.
Wow.
And she rides out the rest of the war from 42 to the end of the war at the Bund Hotel with other like Australian nurses that were captured in like Guinea, like off the islands of Guinea. And then the actual Aleut people, the indigenous people of Attu, stay for a while and they help like feed the Japanese soldiers. And then eventually like Japan rounds up the 46 Aleut people and they send them to Hokkaido to an internment camp. And the crazy thing is that the American government also removed other groups from other islands to protect them from the Japanese and put them in internment camps in southern Alaska that actually resulted in kind of the neglect of them, and it led to like them like like dying. Like they were actually in Japan, they were treated better than Korean or Korean or Chinese POWs. Like they actually were like treated better. I mean, it wasn't outstanding, but it was, you know, they weren't actively like trying to end them.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of that was an interesting piece of it that I found that you wouldn't normally think about. Like there were people there. There are people that live there in the same way that there are, I guess, similarly ethnic people who live on the eastern shores of Russia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I was making sure my geography worked out there with the
No, you added that
directions.
up perfectly. Yeah, this is well. So what I found crazy about this is that the Allies actually. So like basically after this happens, um, the United States and Canada work together in a joint operation to remove the Japanese from North America. And and so if I'm jumping over anything that you have anything else to add, go ahead and jump in.
Okay.
But one of the things I found absolutely fascinating is they basically there were multiple Japanese casualties during the war in this area, but it was more their ships got damaged or sunk that were in the areas of the Aleutian Islands. But then the Allies actually like get ready to invade the island, and a fog had rolled in, and I thought this was kind of similar to George Washington and New York in that sense. Where they look and all of a sudden these I think the admiral, let me see what's his name because I'm gonna say it wrong. Admiral, let's see, apologize. Rear Admiral, and I'm gonna say Kimura Masatomi. Uh, Basically was able to bring in two light cruisers, and 10 destroyers, and get through an American blockade around the island with the cover of fog, and he's able to rescue. They had about 5,200 men on the island, um, and but other ships were destroyed and damaged in this. But what I found interesting was that over 313 Allied casualties were results of trying to retake the island. But retake is a strong word because there was nobody on the island to retake, and that was from friendly fire, booby traps, um, landmines, and accidents,
And the weather.
and the weather.
Yeah. So what was happening is that to understand that you have to resupply. Japan had to send supplies from Japan all the way up, right, to essentially the Bering Sea. And what the United States did is they harassed those resupply ships, and it actually results in the longest and the last kind of ship to ship, like battleship to battleship battle ever. Because after that point, like one of the important things about World War II is that you start using aircraft carriers, and so it becomes this is where the Navy, starts having more airplanes than the Air Force. Well, Air Force doesn't really exist until after World War II, but whatever.
Yeah, 1947, September 18th, Dad's birthday. Shout out Jack Turner. Doesn't watch these, but I appreciate you, Dad.
uh, but like it changed the nature of naval warfare. It was more about like my airplanes are going to go hit you rather than battleship fighting battleship. And so,
Yep.
but like in the North Pacific, there was like the last kind of major battleship. They duked it out for like 3 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
The U.S. probably should have lost the engagement for whatever reason. The Japanese withdrew, and then just were like, nah, we're going to try and resupply with submarines, which was less efficient than surface ships.
Yeah.
And so the result of that was, so the US decides they're going to try and take back the islands. And for some odd reason, like it's really kind of interesting to me, like they decide they're going to start from Attu and work their way back.
Yeah.
So rather than coming from Alaska, um, because like you have Dutch Harbor, and then there's airfields that are further inland on the bigger islands as you get closer back to kind of like mainland Alaska. And it would just make more sense to me that you're going to come from that side, but maybe that's where they expect you to come from.
Yeah.
And so it was Operation Land Crab.
Mm-hmm. Land crab.
Land Crab, not Black Crab, which is a bad Swedish movie on Netflix. Don't watch it.
Don't watch it.
I wasted 2 hours the other night. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Unpaid solicitation.
Yep.
But one of the crazy things about it, so the 7th Infantry Division, which is actually based out of Fort Lewis, right? So, little Washington connection there. The part of the 7th Infantry that they sent up there had just finished training in California for desert combat.
And now they're going to the Arctic.
And they didn't even like refit them before they like sent them to Alaska. And it was like in the summertime, which means it's between 40 and 50 degrees.
Bully.
balmy. Um, they land with 3,500 troops on Attu, and there's significant resistance on the island of Attu, which is, again, it's this doesn't really serve
any military purpose.
You have to take it because they're there. And it's
Yep.
kind of like the Maori when they fought against the New Zealanders when the British showed up in New Zealand. They would build their forts just so that because they knew that the enemy would have to come fight them at the fort. So that you didn't really want to protect stuff. You just built it because we've got to take it because they have it.
Yep.
And that's really what happened at Attu. And so like the 7th Infantry lands and over, they thought it was going to take 3 days. It ends up taking 19, I think. And they keep pushing back. One of the problems is that these islands are covered in what's called muskeg.
Muskeg.
Yeah, which is like lichen and moss and like essentially like a really boggy mud. So you can't drive tanks over it. You can't drive cars over it. So it makes it really hard to get across the island. And so even though it's 40 degrees, it's tundra, so it keeps in like it's cold.
Yep.
And as the soldiers are going with their leather boots, it results in a lot of frostbite, like frozen feet and frostbite on the lower extremities for the American soldiers as well as the Japanese. And, the Japanese put up a staunch resistance. And essentially, Colonel, it was Yamasaki. Sorry, I had an S and a K that got mixed up there.
Oh, okay.
Him and his whole command, like he keeps falling back, and then he realizes that there's nobody coming to save them. And so they lead kind of like one last charge where they're going to try and take over like an artillery position and turn their artillery on the Americans. And so, whether you want to call it a banzai charge or a bayonet charge, it's one of the largest ones they say in military history in World War II. It's about 2,500 men, 2,300, I guess, like between 23, 24. And according to the American records, like out of his entire command, there's only 28 guys that end up surrendering. Wow. So either they die in the advance or after Yamasaki was killed by rifle fire. They said that some of them also committed seppuku at the end before, rather than surrendering because of the way that they've been, I guess, primed mentally for that battle. So, I mean, like you look at it, like there's just a huge casualty rate on Attu, and Kiska is much bigger of an island, geographically speaking. And so we sent 3,500 troops to Attu, and they're going to land, the U.S. lands when they're getting ready to take back Kiska. I think it's 34,000.
Oh, I thought it was 3,400.
Is it 100 or 1,000? I might have put an extra.
That was 3,400. Bombardment to. Sorry, Kiska. You're right. Invasion force of 34,426 Canadian Americans.
Right, 34,000. Because that's what they were expecting. And the reason for it is Kiska, because it's bigger. The purpose of taking Kiska for the Japanese was to build an airfield so that they could then launch attacks into, like, to attack and combat the American land-based aircraft. Because prior to this, when they attacked Dutch Harbor, they were using carrier-based planes, and the United States was using, and Canada were using land-based aircraft. And so they were trying to fight fire with fire so that you didn't endanger your aircraft carriers, because those are gold during World War II.
Yep.
And so like they're expecting a much bigger resistance. And that's where the Japanese withdraw. They pull off, like, what was it? It's like over 5,000
people, yep.
In an hour. You know what I mean? It's an amazing feat. The Allies, the United States and Canada, had dropped 6 million tons of bombs, or 6 million pounds of bombs.
Yep. On
Kiska. Like this, it's I think it's 30 miles by 7. Yeah. You know what I mean? Which is, in the grand scheme of things, isn't super huge, but like, they bombed the living dog out of this island.
Yep.
They land and there's nobody there. And the commander of the American forces says, to attract attention, it's hard to find anything more effective than a great, big, juicy, expensive mistake. Right? That's from Simon Buckner, who was the commanding officer when they landed and essentially got ready to fight this battle, and then there was nobody to fight. Yeah. Within like a week and a half, the Americans finished building an airfield which eventually gets extended and gets expanded so that they can launch and control like air patrols over the Pacific to see, I mean, again, to dominate the North Pacific. So to protect the United States from any kind of incursion coming up north, which you're fighting the weather. I mean,
Yep.
you look at that. One of the biggest things about this is that you not only are you fighting against the enemy, you're fighting against Mother Nature. It's like the old adage of, never fight a land war in Asia, or don't invade Russia during the winter,
Yep. Which nobody actually
because
does invade during the winter. They just invade and they don't finish in time.
yeah, they get bogged down.
Yep.
Um,
But yeah, it's one of those ones where it's like it's kind of crazy about how this all plays out because again, like you said at the beginning, this doesn't get talked about very often. And do you have anything else on this one? Because I have a bonus thing that we need to talk about real quick.
I thought it was interesting on Attu. There's a place called Massacre Valley and like Massacre Bay, and I was like, wow, did they name it after the events of this? And it dated back to Russian fur traders killing the Aleut people, or the Anangan, which is the more specific tribe of the island.
And if you want to hear about another massacre, you can watch season 3, episode 1, Matanzas Inlet. Good luck. So we do have a special request from your former, my current boss man, to also talk about the Japanese attack on the great state of Oregon.
Oh,
and so just throwing this out there really quick because I told him I'd talk about it is one of the interesting things. So this happened July 6th or June 6th, sorry. 1942 was the original invasion, if I was correct on that. September 9th, a Japanese submarine actually surfaces off the coast of Oregon, and they get a crew together to put together a seaplane. And inside the seaplane are two operators so the pilot is, I'm going to probably say this wrong, and I apologize, Nobuo Fujita, and his observer, which is Soji Okuda. And then they loaded two 170-pound incendiary bombs. For those of you who don't know, incendiary bombs are the bombs that you drop intending to start fires in cities. The United States and its allies were really good at doing this in Germany at the end of World War II, especially Dresden, which had a higher death toll than the two nuclear blasts off the coast or in Japan because of the fires. So they actually fly and they get to, I think is it Mount Emily? Does that sound right? I know I'm putting you on the spur of the moment. You lived closer to Oregon than I did. So, but I believe it's Mount Whitney. Yep, I found it. It's Mount Whitney. And their goal is actually start forest fires on the west coast of the United States to keep people occupied over there and not with what they are doing. And so they attempt to do this. It doesn't really ever start anything. But what's interesting, and I thought this was interesting, is the plane actually shows up again. When was it show up again? Oh, I'm not gonna remember now. It actually shows up again, and all these firefighters and everybody are 20 days later. It shows up again. All these firefighters are dispatched, like they're ready to go wherever the bomb's gonna hit. Da 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 da. But the plane flies around and doesn't drop a bomb. So then what was cool was the pilot. So Fujita returns to Oregon in 1962. And he lands he's at the Brookings annual Azalea Festival where he surrenders his 400-year-old samurai sword to the mayor of the town and says, "This is the perfect way to end, what I did." And so again, we're not, and there are stories too. I think there's multiple stories of German U-boats being sighted off of New York City and other major East coasts. So, but it's interesting. This is the first time that we talk about like a land invasion of the United States since the War of 1812, which started when, Barker?
I'm hoping in the war is 1812.
Good. There is a guy on Jeopardy. You can look it up. He did miss that question. So
you always got to think it's a trick question. I think you were going to talk about, there was one of the other things that the Japanese did to also try and start forest fires was like weather balloons with an incendiary bomb on it. And there was I think it was a Sunday school picnic or whatnot that one fell on. Yep. And it was like, it's like one of the only ones that actually like made it across. They were trying to put them in the Gulf Stream and have
Yep.
the air currents drop them over the United States, but it didn't work out so much. But it's one of those things, like, you think about, look at a map of the Pacific. We've been playing a lot of Worldle with my kids. You suggested it, and I've been pushing it out to my kids, so it's great geography practice.
Hashtag Wordle. It's world with the LE, like the game Wordle that's in the New York Times. Try it sometime. Shows you different places. You got to guess and you got to get within a certain mileage, and it starts giving you more and more hints. If you're really baller like Barker and I, you play without the map. If you're a rookie, no big deal. Play with the maps. They still don't help you sometimes.
Yeah, but you'll notice how sparse the North Pacific is. There's not a lot of islands between Midway and the Aleutians. And
Yep.
so that's why controlling Midway and controlling the Aleutians it was literally the gateway to the North Pacific that never really materialized too much, but that you could argue that's because the United States maintained control of both of those choke points.
Right. And
Um,
defended it very, very fiercely.
yeah, so for 14 months, Japan does hold a couple of islands in the Aleutian island chain. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't amount to a lot. It was probably a much bigger expenditure than what the result of what they got from it.
Right.
But like, yeah, it's just one of those lesser known things that we don't talk about a whole lot, which is why we're here.
Yup.
If you have any random things you want to know about, or you think you knew something and you're not sure if it's real and you're too lazy to fact check,
Mhm.
just let us know and we'll look it up. So we enjoy this stuff. It's kind of fun. I enjoy learning about this stuff. I went down a
Yeah.
rabbit hole about the teacher, and her radio husband operator,
Yeah.
radio operator. I think she retired to Washington actually.
Oh, really?
So left Alaska and came back down to Washington to retire. So
That's fair.
never got in the more official recounts, they say that she never said what happened to her husband because she kind of blacked out from like the attack until like a few weeks later when she was like arriving in Japan. She like doesn't have,
Yeah.
maybe it's, repressed or whatever,
Stress.
but like,
Yeah. Stress and
she doesn't remember what happened. She cannot
shock.
say what happened, but of course there's stories.
Yep.
So
Yeah. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, we have debating about our topic for next week. We are going to record. We are going to drop a video on Thursday for next week. It's conference week for me, so I'm going to be up later at night, uh, for getting to talk to all these great parents of the Quincy School District and excited to talk to them about their kids and all the great things that they're doing. But so we're going to record. If you have an idea, drop it. You know where to find us. Drop it in the comments on this video. Write us a letter. I don't know where you'd send it. I guess RA Long High School, you could write Barker a letter, or Quincy Middle School, you could write me a letter. If you don't feel like writing letters, then you can find us on Instagram at Turnbark Time, or on our Facebook page at Turnbark Time, or at our email, turnbarktime@gmail.com. So those are all of our things. Barker, anything else for the good of the order?
I'm trying to think, man. I don't know. Like, yeah, I mean, we're here. I don't know. We're not here for the money. We're here for you, right?
Yep.
So, like, let us know what you want us to talk about, and we'll talk about it. So, if you don't, we'll just pick something out of
Yeah,
random
otherwise
out of our
you just get
brains.
to talk about random things. So, all right, guys, it's been awesome. Until next time, I'm the Turn,
I'm the Bark.
and we're going to be here a long time. Have a good night, everybody,
Be safe.
and be well.